We are working our way through the book of Genesis. One part of the week we are in the Old Testament. One part of the week we're in the New Testament. I think we are sort of in the middle of a chapter that's very information heavy. So sometimes it feels like we're just kind of slogging on through. A lot of this is important setup, so we need to pay attention to it as closely as we can. Now, we haven't been together for a couple of weeks. We are currently in the 16th chapter of Genesis. We will close out the 16th chapter of Genesis tonight. We're working our way as quickly as we can, but we're making sure that we're efficient when we do so. So, as I said, we haven't been together for a couple of weeks, so I think it's important for us to maybe read the chapter up into the point where we are tonight. That way, it'll help to remind us of our context. As a reminder, I read out of the King James Bible. Please follow along in the Bible that's in front of you. It's okay if you don't use the King James. I happen to enjoy the King James, and I do believe most experts will agree that the King James Version is a very good, very close approximation of the originals, and that's why I use it. Genesis 16, starting at verse 1. Now Sarai, Abram's wife, bare him no children, and she had an handmaid, an Egyptian, whose name was Hagar. And Sarai said unto Abram, Behold, now the Lord hath restrained me from bearing. I pray thee, go in unto my maid. It may be that I may obtain children by her. And Abram hearkened to the voice of Sarai. And Sarai, Abram's wife, took Hagar her maid, the Egyptian, after Abram had dwelt 10 years in the land of Canaan, and gave her to her husband Abram to be his wife. Very often God is giving us sort of time checks with the story of Abram. I think it's important for us to understand those things. We are getting an idea that Abram and Sarai had to be patient. Their faith was being tested all of the time. It had been 10 years since God took them out of Ur of the Chaldees, and just now those promises are starting to unfold. Can you imagine waiting 10 years for God's promises to come about? That's what Abram and Sarai had to deal with. And they didn't do very well, as we have learned from this chapter. Verse 4, And he went in unto Hagar, and she conceived. And when she saw that she had conceived, her mistress was despised in her eyes. And Sarai said unto Abram, My wrong be upon thee. Sarai is blaming Abram. My wrong be upon thee. I have given my maid into thy bosom. And when she saw that she had conceived, I was despised in her eyes. The Lord judge between me and thee. Sarai was being judged by Hagar. Hagar was looking down on Sarai because Sarai couldn't conceive, but Hagar could. Verse 6, But Abram said unto Sarai, Behold, thy maid is in thy hand. Do to her as it pleaseth thee. And when Sarai dealt hardly with her, she fled from her face. Verse 7, And the angel of the Lord found her by a fountain of water in the wilderness, by the fountain in the way to Shur. And he said, Hagar, Sarai's maid, whence camest thou, and whither wilt thou go? And she said, I flee from the face of my mistress Sarai. Verse 9, And the angel of the Lord said unto her, Return to thy mistress, and submit thyself under her hands. Verse 10, And the angel of the Lord said unto her, I will multiply thy seed exceedingly, that it shall not be numbered for a multitude. Here is yet another promise of God that has been literally fulfilled. And what's even more exciting is we ourselves are witnesses to this fulfillment. There's somewhere around 500 million people on the earth right now who are living proof that God keeps his word. You see, the Arabic people are the multitude that the angel of the Lord promised. They and all their ancestors are the result of Abram's union with Hagar. The Arab people all descended or mostly descended from Ishmael. But, I'm befuddled. I've told you before that I don't mind when I have to admit that. So here we are again. I've always wondered why God promised this great multitude to Hagar. Now, there aren't any specifics here, so I can assume it's not terribly important, but it's intriguing. Now, some have speculated, and I think I agree, that God allowed this to happen. In fact, God entered into this situation to facilitate the formation of thousands of years of strife between the children of the flesh and the children of the promise. God is playing out a drama on the world stage. The children of the flesh are the offspring of Hagar and Abram, and the children of the promise are the offspring of Abram and Sarai. Sorry for the spoiler. It's a geopolitical microcosm of a spiritual reality. Since the moment both of these boys entered into the world, the son of Hagar and the son of Sarai, from the moment those two were together on the world stage, there's been conflict between them that continues to this very day. Why do you think there's so much trouble over there? And that physical reality has a deep spiritual meaning. I want you to pay attention to this. There will always be disagreement between those who rely on their own efforts to please God and those who rely on his promises of grace. The child of Hagar and Abram represent the flesh. The child of Sarai and Abram, Isaac, represent the children of grace, those who rely on grace. War will forever be waged between those who believe in their own strength, their own wisdom, their own character. They believe those things can achieve God's favors, and those who know that such a thing is not possible, that God's favor is unearned. Sometimes we act and react in our own strength because we lack patience, and sometimes we act and react in our own strength because we lack trust. The world is split into those two types. In the case of Sarai, she resorted to human means because she lacked trust. God said they were going to have a child, and this, by the way, is Sarai's view of that promise. Verse 2 again, and Sarai said unto Abram, behold, now the Lord hath restrained me from bearing. I pray thee, go in unto my maid. It may be that I may obtain children by her. And Abram hearkened to the voice of Sarai. Listen, it was her opinion that because God had not yet given her a child, that he was actually preventing her from ever having one. That's what the original word means, prevent. Sarah's opinion was that God was preventing her. The King James says, restraining her from giving birth, which of course was true. God had not yet given them a child. But like the rest of us, Sarai allowed her distrust to assign meaning to something she knew nothing about. We don't know God's dealings with us. And when we jump ahead of his promises, bad things happen. She didn't know, Sarai didn't know why God hadn't blessed them with a child yet. And instead of leaning on what he said, instead of falling back on the promise of God for reassurance, she allowed her doubt to grow into insolence. Sarai's actions demonstrated that she believed that God was insincere and he was not going to be the agent of the fulfillment of his own promise. So she decided she had to be. Now, though it sounds like I'm speaking from a posture of judgment or condemnation, that's just not true. I sincerely believe this story is in Scripture to draw out of us the realization that our own doubts have been similarly motivated. Again, this isn't me trying to make excuses for the poor behavior of these saints. To do so may even motivate us to forgive our own colossal failures. We mustn't make excuses for them. We may claim, if we go around saying it's okay for Abram and Sarai to fail God, we may claim, well, I'm just too important to worry about being a sinner. God needs me too much for me to concern myself with these little slips in trust. Okay, yeah, maybe I sin here and there. Maybe I lose my faith once in a while, but I'm a pretty good guy in the church. I'm pretty well known. My contribution to the church negates all of my failures. It is a grievous error to miss the fact that these heroes of the Bible are no less human than you and I. God wants us to see that we're all prone to sin and that sin does damage to the kingdom. Listen, I've done and will continue to do precisely what Sarai did. I don't say that proudly or with indifference. God knows I don't want to fail him, but he and I both know I will. In fact, he's more prepared for that than I am. I'll react to my doubts in the most destructive and offensive to him way. And I'll even convince myself, or at least I'll try to convince myself, that I'm doing all that for his sake, up to and including trying in my own strength to earn his blessings on my life. I'm going to present my obedience to God as if it's some badge of honor and an excuse for him to treat me extra special instead of as an obligation of a good son. And I'm sure I'll fail in that exact way over and over for the rest of my life. My flesh and my spirit will wage war on each other, just like the sons of Ishmael waged war after war after war on the sons of Isaac and vice versa. Verse 10 again, and the angel of the Lord said unto her, I will multiply thy seed exceedingly, that it shall not be numbered for a multitude. And the angel of the Lord said unto her, Behold, thou art with child, and shalt bear a son, and shalt call his name Ishmael, because the Lord hath heard thy affliction. Now the word Ishmael is a compound Hebrew word. It's made up of the verb shama, which means to hear, and the proper noun el, which you already know means God. Ishmael is the God who hears. Hagar is told to name her son after the God who hears, and he does so as a reminder of our Lord's direct intervention into Hagar's plight. Now, last time when we were asking ourselves why the angel of the Lord made the effort to seek out Hagar, we mentioned that some have speculated that it was the prayers of Abram and Sarai that moved the Lord to pursue the Egyptian slave girl. Well, perhaps this is why they came to that mistaken conclusion. maybe based on the angel's command to name the baby Ishmael, the Lord who hears, or the God who hears. They assumed it was someone's prayer God heard, and the most likely candidate was Abram and Sarai. Now, although I see how such a conclusion could be reached, I still reject the theory based on the fact that it just doesn't seem like the old couple cared all that much in the beginning. After all, it was Sarai's harsh treatment that sent Hagar away, and it was Abram's apathy that failed to prevent it. I think the prayers God heard came from Hagar herself. I think that's the inference here. The angel said, God heard thy affliction. It's my opinion that God was responding to Hagar's pleas, and God, by naming the child Ishmael, didn't want the mother nor any of us to forget that he's truly a God that hears and responds to the cries of his people. And the angel of the Lord said unto her, Behold, thou art with child, and shalt bear a son, and shalt call his name Ishmael, because the Lord heard thy affliction. And he will be a wild man. His hand will be against every man, and every man's hand against him, and he shall dwell in the presence of all his brethren. This is another part of the prophecy of God that we're seeing fulfilled in our own day. We are witnessing the sons of Hagar up against every man, and every man up against the sons of Hagar. There is constant war in the Middle East. God said it was going to happen, and we're watching it. Now, you can get mad at me all you want to, but this is God's word. In fact, if you're upset, it's really God you're upset with. Next verse, and she called the name of the Lord that spake unto her, Thou God seest me. In the Hebrew, it's El Ra'i. For she said, Have I also looked after him that seeth me? Now, this is a lovely moment, in my opinion. It's, at least when I was going through it, it felt reminiscent of the experience all saved people have. Hagar is undergoing in this moment the after effects of an encounter with God, similar to the one you and I had when we got saved. She's expressing a sort of joyful disbelief that she had just met God. We get a sense, don't we, that she wasn't quite sure what was happening while in the actual experience. But now that she's had a moment or two to meditate on it, probably after the angel of the Lord departed, or even while the angel was departing, now that she's there alone, she comes to this indescribable realization that she was in the presence of God. The true moment of conversion is that same experience for most of us. While we're in it, while we are moving up to that altar or whatever it is, we don't exactly know what's going to happen. By the way, that altar could be literal or figurative. You don't have to go to an actual altar to get saved, but the experience always feels like an actual altar. It's where you and God meet. In the Bible, it's an altar, an altarous place where God meets man. That's what it feels like when you're being converted, when you're being saved. When we go over that experience in our minds, that moment at the altar, when we think about the enormous impossibility of it, we come to the distinct conclusion that we didn't go to that experience. We were brought to that experience. When we stop and think of the person we were before that moment, our attitude toward those weirdos that go around telling you how long they've been saved, those oddballs who brag about being in a personal relationship with Jesus, when we ponder how far from being like them we were before we went to that altar, how much that type got under our skin. And yet, here we are. We're saying the same things they said. We're feeling the same things they said they felt. When that happens to us, when we see the difference that we have experienced, the different person we now are, we become convinced that that sort of change didn't come from within us. It had to come from God himself. And add to that the memory of feeling swept away by the gospel that time you responded to it, the same thing you must have heard 1,000 times before, but that last time and every time since, how it made you feel. You felt like a light all of a sudden started shining in your heart and your mind. And you just know you're on the receiving end of that light, not the sending end. You put all those things together and you realize, just like Hagar, thou God seest me. El Ra'i. As most of you chapel regulars know, I love the names of God found in the Bible. We've taught on the topic many times, and this is one of my favorites, El Ra'i, the God who sees me. Now, the scholars can't seem to agree as to whether Hagar was a pagan at heart in that moment or maybe a converted pagan. Did she sometime before this escape back toward Egypt, switch from the religion of her homeland, or did she remain as she was from childhood? Of course, we have nothing to tell us this, but in this instance, I don't think it matters. Either way, she must have had deep-seated memories of a system of worship way back there where she came from that centered on this menagerie of silent, cold, what have you done for me lately kind of gods. Gods who demand but never deliver, not in any meaningful way. And even if the people thanked the God of the Nile for the bountiful harvest, they never really got to speak to him or her directly. That would have been an absurd thought. These weren't the stop by the fountain and give you a pep talk kind of gods. These were the screw up the offerings and your entire family starves next harvest season type of gods. Even if Hagar left all that behind and started worshiping Abram's Jehovah, this still would have been her aha moment. I'll never forget the time when Catherine and I were just dating and we were driving to Disney World from Tampa. It was about a 90-minute drive, and we started talking about God. We didn't know each other all that well yet, and I don't think she was fully aware of my depth of love for our Savior. I must have started telling her about my joy and why I loved God and his word so much, and at one point I looked over at her and she had these giant tears rolling down her cheeks. I think I asked her, what's wrong? And she said, I don't know. I don't know why I'm crying. Now, what you may not know about Catherine is that she grew up a pastor's kid. I hadn't talked about anything she didn't hear before. This wasn't breaking news to her. And yet it was hitting her like a soft spring rain. It felt new. It felt life-giving. She was crying because she was, perhaps for the first time, putting reality to what she had always thought was just religion. Listen, Hagar had always known that the divine one ran the universe, but she never knew he knew about her. And she called the name of the Lord that spake unto her, Thou God seest me. For she said, Have I also here looked after him that seeth me? It's an amazing experience for her. So much so, this is a really odd verse. It's that second part of the verse that's a bit tough to interpret. It's really an awkward translation. Have I also here looked after him that seeth me? That's a tough sentence to break down. As is so often the case with these difficult passages, the experts are all over the place. I spent some time looking at it. I scoured the resources I had, and I have to admit that there's no completely satisfying answer in my mind. Almost everyone agrees that what's being expressed here is Hagar's amazement as she realizes that she's just spoken to God. Of course, she didn't know it was the Son of God, as we now do, but you and I both know that they're one. Anyhow, Hagar is expressing her astonishment for what she had just experienced. No matter what religion you follow, a visit from God is an extremely rare event. So she's vocalizing her amazement. But it's how she says it that's confounding me and just about everyone else that reads and tries to interpret this verse. That's not an unusual thought, though. This was an amazing experience very few people get. Try to explain to the person who's not saved what it feels like to be saved. It's going to come up, blah, 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 blah. That's how it's going to sound. That's what's happening here. Now, this isn't a very critical part of the story, so we can afford to be a little less accurate in our assessment. We got the important point, I think. The important part is Hagar's reaction to such a blessed surprise. So here's what I think the rest is saying. Again, it's this, have I also here looked after him that seeth me? That's a bit muddy, not just for me, but for others too. So after looking at the experts, here's where I think I landed. The sticky part is, for me, the word after. I was actually hoping it was a poor or inaccurate translation. It's not. The experts all agree it's translated correctly. So it appears that Hagar must have only realized fully that she was speaking to God as God was departing from her, and only then did she sort of glance over at him. After he was departing, she expressed her reverential awe at seeing, as so few have, the very God who sees her. Have I also here looked after him that seeth me? As I said, I'm not 100% satisfied with that, but I think that's probably the best we're going to get. I'll just write that down on the ever-growing list of questions I'll have when I get to heaven. Verse 7. And the angel of the Lord found her by a fountain of water in the wilderness, by a fountain in the way to Shur. And he said, Hagar, Sarai's maid, whence camest thou, and whither wilt thou go? And she said, I flee from the face of my mistress Sarai. And the angel of the Lord said unto her, Return to thy mistress, and submit thyself under her hands. And the angel of the Lord said unto her, I will multiply thy seed exceedingly, that it shall not be numbered for multitude. And the angel of the Lord said unto her, Behold, thou art with child, and shalt bear a son, and shalt call his name Ishmael, because the Lord hath heard thy affliction. and he will be a wild man. His hand will be against every man, and every man's hand against him, and he shall dwell in the presence of all his brethren. And she called the name of the Lord that spake unto her, Thou God seest me, El Roi, for she said, Have I also here looked after him that seeth me? Verse 14, wherefore the well was called Be'er Lahai Roi. Behold, it is between Kadesh and Bered. Now, Be'er Lahai Roi means a well of the living one who seeth me. Hagar was beside herself with awe over what happened to her, but mostly what she learned in the experience. She didn't mention the great multitude her son will father. She didn't bring up the type of nation she was told they'd become. To her, the most outstanding part of this event is that she learned that God sees his people and he cares for us. Surely Hagar had heard Abram say that sort of thing before, but now she was able to experience it, and she didn't want that feeling to ever go away. And so she commemorates the spot as a remembrance of her incredible encounter. And I would imagine she went back there often. Be'er Lahai Roi, a well of the living God who seeth me. Friends, that's the same God you serve. Hagar's no special than you are. If God sees Hagar, he sees you and me. And that should give us eternal comfort. I know a few of you out there that need that. Let me ask you again, have you ever seen the God the world tells you exists in this book? They say he's cold. They say he's thoughtless. He's racist, misogynist, brutal, mean, intolerant. Where is that God they say exists? Listen, next time someone feeds you that nonsense, read Genesis 16 to them. It probably won't stop them from spreading their lies, but they're not going to try it on you ever again. Now, we're also told here where this well is. And by the way, some like to point out that in the narrative, this location went from a spring to a well, as if such a change impacts the validity of the story. As usual, my response is nothing to see here. I don't know why it changed, but I sincerely don't care. If your faith is that weak, you've got a little more work to do in this book. Anyhow, spend more time studying and meditating and praying, and these little things won't bother you much as you go along. The well or the spring, we are told, is located between Kadesh and Bered. Most experts agree that Kadesh here is none other than Kadesh Barnea, which is a commonly mentioned location in the Bible. Bered, on the other hand, is a complete mystery. No one knows exactly where Bered is, and therefore, if anyone tells you they know where Be'er Lahai Roi is, just know they're guessing. Verse 15, and Hagar bare Abram a son, and Abram called his son's name, which Hagar bare Ishmael. Obviously, Hagar obeys the angel of the Lord and returns to Abram and Sarai. And I think that goes a long way to demonstrate the change that the experience brought about in Hagar's outlook. Before her encounter in the desert, she was haughty, she was self-centered, she was impulsive. The Lord pursues her, overtakes her, and expresses his love and care over her, and it changed Hagar. And listen, this is always the result of a true encounter with God. And everyone that's been truly saved has had an encounter with God that never ends. Therefore, if you're still the same ubiquitous sinner you've always been, if your attitude is that since Jesus died for us, you can do whatever you want, then friend, you didn't meet God. You're not saved. No one who has met God in their heart or elsewhere is the same afterward. And then this final verse is something we've gotten used to in the story of the patriarch. And Abram was 86 years old. That's 86. A score is 20. 80. 86 when Hagar bare Ishmael to Abram. We once again get an age check for Abram. He is 86 years old when Ishmael is born. Now, this is a rather interesting aspect of the story we're being told. God, time and again, and will continue to remind us of the advanced years of his servant Abram. And doing so actually assists us in a couple of ways. First of all, it's obvious that we're being told of these incredible feats Abram is accomplishing so late in life, even in a time when actually people live to much more advanced age than we do now. Abram is considered quite elderly, and that helps to paint for us a picture of the relationship God has with not only Abram, but all the rest of us. From this, we learn that God doesn't see things the way that we do. There are no physical limitations to what he can accomplish through us. With God's strength and power and wisdom, there's nothing he can't do, even when our strengths and power and wisdom are limited and diminishing. In other words, never give up on what God can accomplish through you. Even though we may think we're useless to him, he never sees it that way because he never relies on our capabilities. Why should he? He's mighty in and of himself. I honestly believe this is one of the lessons we're to learn through the story of Abram. God is never done with us, even though we may not feel very capable. And so I believe that's one of the reasons we get reminded of Abram's age. God is clearly telling us that he can do anything through us weak vessels. The things we may feel disqualify us are not even obstacles to God. Now, the other reason I think God gives us Abram age checks, as I call them, is that it's a good way to keep sort of a tight timeline of the events in Abram's life. At this age, this happened. At that age, that happened. And we can calculate the time in between. Listen, God doesn't always give us detailed information, but he sometimes does. Well, that does it for chapter 16. This one was noticeably shorter than the others, but it's still one of the most important. It's here that we're given a sort of introduction as to how the family dynamic is going to play out in the lives of the future nation of Israel. The effects of what transpired in this chapter will be felt for the next several centuries. Not to mention the fact that we've also been introduced to the importance and challenges of God's expectations regarding faith and obedience. All right, so next time, chapter 17, trust me, another doozy. See you then.